Beyond the red carpet, the day a billionaire learned the value of grease and love. He runs a billion-dollar empire and believes everything in the world can be solved with data and money. She runs the backstage of the most exclusive event on the planet, the Met Gala, where sweat and skill are worth more than any diamond. Vance Sterling thought he'd spend the night dodging photographers. He just didn't expect to be forcibly recruited by the one woman who couldn't care less about his status. Welcome to the other side of the red carpet. The blinding flash of cameras above felt like a memory from another life. Vance Sterling, a man born breathing filtered air and walking on velvet carpets, now had his face inches away from an oil leak. He wasn't smiling for lenses with algorithmic precision anymore. He was groaning under the weight of an enormous metal panel, every second mattering. "Don't you dare drop that panel, refrigerator penguin!" Tess's voice cut through the noise of the machines. "If you move 1 millimeter, the whole structure gives out, and the Empress's gown turns to dust before the first glass of juice. Hold it together with whatever's left of your courage." Vance could feel the fibers of his Italian silk suit stretching under the pressure. A thick drop of grease jumped off a gear and landed dead center on his immaculate white shirt. He felt a deep, almost spiritual pain, as if his annual bonus were being stained forever. "Do you have any idea how technically insane this is?" Vance let out a desperate squeak, his arms trembling like jello. "I'm the CEO of Sterling Logistics. I don't hold things. I hire entire teams to do that." Tess didn't even bother looking at him. She had a bright headlamp on and a screwdriver tucked into her messy bun. Her hands, agile and precise, danced between the gears. "Great. Then use that big brain of yours to keep this base in place. Right now, you're nothing but a very expensive, very whiny metal support. Your data means nothing down here. Hold the weight. Art history doesn't care about your last name." "My hands. I'm losing feeling. I think my fingers just quit on me, all at once," Vance growled, squeezing his eyes shut as hot steam hit his face. "This is absolutely outrageous. I'll sue everything in this basement, including the air." The comfort zone's upstairs. Tess made a precise technical adjustment to lock a piece into place. "Down here, the priority is saving months of work. Focus on the base. If that support tilts, the whole system locks up, and you'll be decorated head to toe in motor oil. Do you want to be useful, or do you want to keep being a luxury statue?" The word useless hit Vance like an electric shock. Something ancient stirred inside him. A spark of defiance he hadn't felt since he built his first company in a garage, and it lit up in his eyes. "I'm not a statue," he roared, driving his shoulders against the vibrating steel. "I'm a Sterling. We don't quit under pressure. Less speech, more muscle, penguin," Tess shouted, snapping the final latch into place. "On 3, you give it everything you've got. Ready for the real world?" Vance breathed in the sharp smell of metal and sweat. He looked at Tess. She was small, but she seemed built from hardened steel. There was a kind of dignity in that workshop he had never found in any of his glass offices. "1," Tess started. Vance planted his patent leather shoes on the slippery floor. "2." The machine let out one last loud groan. "3. Now." Vance let out a full roar of effort, throwing everything he had against the plate. The metal gave way. Just the 1 millimeter it needed. A deeply satisfying metallic click echoed through the basement. Silence swallowed the room, broken only by the sound of 2 people catching their breath. "Well, look at that." Tess rolled her shoulders back and wiped her forehead with her arm. "The fancy suit's got some muscle in those legs. I figured you'd give up on 2. You can let go slowly. The piece is saved for the flashbulbs." Vance exhaled the breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked down at himself. Suit in tatters, hands covered in oil, his perfectly styled hair now a complete disaster. For the first time in 10 years, he didn't feel like a corporate brand. He felt alive. He opened his mouth, maybe to offer an elegant complaint, but fate had other plans. "Take!" A sharp, dry metallic sound rang through the basement. A steel bolt shot off the structure, bounced off a pipe, and vanished into the dark. Tess froze in place. Her eyes went wide under the beam of the headlamp. "Oh no!" Her voice, so steady until that moment, cracked. Vance, still holding both arms up in a victory pose, asked with pitiful hope, "What was that? Is that the sound of success? Please tell me we did it." Tess stepped back, grabbing Vance by the collar of what was left of his shirt and yanking him with surprising force. That's the sound of disaster. The main bolt snapped. The whole thing's coming down. Get out of there now. Vance barely had time to see the massive shadow of the panel tilting toward him like a falling wall. His final cry was the last lament of a man who loved his possessions. My $2,000 suit, no. The floor shook, the emergency lights flickered, and the basement was swallowed by a cloud of dust and absolute darkness. 12 hours before the mud and the chaos, Manhattan. Vance Sterling stood at the top of his glass empire, where even the oxygen seemed too afraid to step out of line. He didn't live in an office, he lived inside a giant Swiss watch. Vance stared at the LED screens on the wall as if they were subordinates begging for mercy. Blue dots blinked across a world map, his fleet of ships. Ship 402 is 3 seconds behind schedule in Rotterdam. Vance murmured, adjusting the chronometer on his wrist with a look of pure indignation. 3 seconds. That's how civilization starts to fall apart. He pivoted on his heels with the precision of a compass. His patent leather shoes were polished so brightly they could have blinded an airline pilot. He crossed to his oak desk and, with a gesture of supreme boredom, tossed his phone. It slid across the surface, scraped the edge of the wood, and stopped perfectly parallel to the corner. Logistics is perfection, he declared to the empty room. People are just variables that forget where they left their keys. I don't calculate people. I calculate victories. He slipped on his Italian silk jacket. The piece was so perfectly structured that he looked like he'd been sculpted from marble, not born of a mother. He checked the knot of his tie. If it were even 1 millimeter off, he would probably cancel the entire day. But then, the forbidden sound echoed through the room. Plim plim, not a prophet alert, a soft piano tone. The baritone. Vance stopped. The ice mask cracked. He pushed aside a stack of billion-dollar reports to reveal a digital picture frame tucked behind them. In it, Vera Sterling smiled among flowers, radiant, captured in a moment of pure joy, long before she needed round-the-clock care in her medical suite. The notification glowed on his phone screen. Reminder, Vera's wish, don't be late. Variables, he sighed. This time, his voice wasn't robotic. It carried a weight. The weight of longing. Vance slipped the phone into his inside breast pocket, right over his heart, and decided it was time to face the real world. But the real world, unlike his spreadsheets, didn't take orders. As he turned to leave, the tip of his patent leather shoe found the one enemy he hadn't accounted for, the barely there fold of a Persian rug. What followed was a sequence of movements no CEO would ever want captured on slow-motion camera. Vance Sterling, the man who commanded global fleets, lost a fight against his own foot. His arms spun through the air like the blades of a broken helicopter. He stumbled left, overcorrected right, and nearly embraced a piece of modern art worth the price of a yacht. What in the world? Is the floor conspiring against me? He growled, regaining his balance with a forced pose that screamed, I absolutely planned that. He glanced around to make sure the security cameras weren't laughing at him. He yanked his jacket straight with one sharp tug and brushed invisible dust off his shoulder. His dignity was slightly dented, but his ego was still intact. For now. He stepped into the elevator. As the floor numbers ticked down, he inspected every detail in the mirror. Hair, unmoving. Suit, immaculate. Ego, bulletproof. Or so he believed. James, we're heading to the museum, but I need to see my mother first, he instructed as he slid into the limousine. And let's hope the event team wasn't assembled by amateurs. Vance gazed out at the lights of New York, completely convinced he'd spend the evening shaking hands and sipping expensive sparkling water. He had no idea that in the basement of that very museum, Fate was wearing a dirty pair of coveralls and holding a wrench, ready to dismantle not just a machine, but his entire perfect life. Vance steps into the room. His footsteps, once commanding, now fall soft and almost hesitant on the plush carpet. He walks between stacks of classic fashion sketches from the 1970s that cover the white linen bed, their vibrant drawings full of curves and soul, a brutal contrast to the cold data screens he just left behind in his office. While Manhattan roars outside with its deafening rush, Vera Sterling's medical suite is a sanctuary of silence and history. The hospital smell tries and fails to overpower the scent of lavender and the sweet fragrance of old paper. Here, time isn't measured in market bonuses, but in the slow, persistent rhythm of the machines monitoring the heartbeat of the woman who built an empire. He stops in front of a sketch of a red dress where the paint still seems to want to leap off the page. Vera is sitting up, propped against silk pillows. Her eyes, though tired, still carry the glow of someone who has seen the world through a kaleidoscope, not an Excel spreadsheet. "You're late, Vance." Her voice is a firm whisper, but loaded with an irony that time never managed to erase. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Let me guess, traffic logistics on Fifth Avenue decided not to cooperate with your schedule? Vance attempts a smile, a rare movement that never quite makes it to newspaper cameras. He steps closer and takes his mother's hand. Her skin feels like tissue paper, thin and delicate, but her grip is surprisingly strong, as if she were still commanding every truck in the Sterling fleet. "Optimization takes time, Mother. I was making sure nothing was out of control before coming to see you," he says, adjusting the blanket over her legs with a gentleness his large hands don't seem built for. Vera lets out a quiet laugh, weak but perfectly aimed. She takes him in from head to toe, the $2,000 suit, the hair that even New York's wind wouldn't dare to mess up. "Vance, my dear, you're not living. You're turning into a luxury algorithm. Your heart beats in binary code, and your eyes only see profit margins and delivery routes. I keep the family legacy safe. Vera, that's my job and my purpose. The legacy of our family isn't the steel in those trucks, Vance." She pulls his hand, guiding him to look at one of the old sketches, a drawing of a leather jacket covered in intricate embroidery. It's the passion that moves what's inside them. It's the story every piece carries. Vera touches her son's face, her trembling hand finding Vance's rigid jaw. A silence settles over the room, heavy and deep. The rhythmic sound of the heart monitor seems to count the seconds of a life that doesn't come back. "Go to the museum tonight, Vance," she tells him, and the light in her eyes is undeniable. "Don't go as an elite donor. Don't go as a Sterling worried about the photos. Go as a man. Find the engineering that can't be calculated by your fastest computer. Find the soul in things. And who knows, maybe you'll stumble across your own along the way." Vance sighs, feeling the weight of the request. He hates social events, hates the smell of champagne and the hollow small talk, but Vera's gaze is an order that logic can't process. "I'll go, Mother. For you. I'll make sure the restoration of the main piece is the highlight of the night. I'll oversee every technical detail." Vera pats his hand and closes her eyes for a moment, an enigmatic smile forming on her pale lips. "Good. Now go. You have an appointment with the unexpected, and the unexpected hates to be left waiting at the door." Vance leans down, kisses his mother's forehead, a kiss that smells of respect and a quiet fear of loss, and walks out of the room with quick steps. He's already mentally mapping the night. Arrive at 8, pose for 3 photos, check the basement security system, and leave in exactly 45 minutes. No mistakes, no surprises. The moment the door clicks softly shut, Vera opens one eye. She turns to the nurse, a stout woman organizing medicine bottles in the corner of the room with the precision of a drill sergeant. "He has absolutely no idea what's waiting for him down there, does he, Martha?" Vera whispers, a childlike mischief lighting up her face, like someone who just hid a piece of candy. "Probably not, Mrs. Sterling." Martha smiles, her eyes never leaving the thermometer. The restoration team is already in full battle position. "And Tess?" Vera asks, her voice full of an almost girlish anticipation. "Has that stubborn girl shown up yet? Please tell me she didn't forget her headlamp." "She's been in the basement since 5 in the morning, ma'am," said the main structural bolt had a suspicious groan, and she wasn't leaving until the gown was shielded against both gravity and any clumsy billionaires. Vera leans back into her pillows, releasing a sigh of pure satisfaction. She looks at the sketches spread across the bed, specifically at a drawing of a mechanical dress that seems to defy the laws of physics. Perfect. The walking algorithm and the engineer of souls. "Let the party begin, Martha. And I do hope the museum floor is nicely waxed." As Vance steps into his limousine and scrolls through performance charts on his tablet, he doesn't feel the invisible thread that Vera Sterling just tied around his ankle. He believes he's heading to a gala event. He doesn't know he's walking into a battlefield where his only weapon, logic, will be completely useless against a wrench and a pair of tired eyes that see straight through his silk armor. The countdown to Manhattan's most romantic disaster had officially begun. Manhattan roared beyond the granite walls of the Metropolitan Museum. It was a symphony of sirens, fan screams, and the relentless crack of thousands of camera flashes turning the night into an aggressive, artificial day. Inside his limousine, Vance Sterling adjusted his platinum cufflinks with fingers that still seemed to carry the warmth of his mother's hand. He breathed in the sterile, conditioned air, trying to rebuild the armor of his personal algorithm. The limousine stopped. The moment the door opened, the chaos tried to pour in. "Mr. Sterling, a word about the merger with Logistics Global." A man in a cheap suit and a hungry stare lurched forward, tripping over his own feet and thrusting a contract out like it was a winning chess move. "Just one signature, Vance. This will change the market." Vance didn't respond. He didn't calculate dialogues with persistent variables. He simply pivoted his body with the agility of a fencer, and instead of walking the main red carpet, ducked left, slipping through a side metal door that read only, "Service entrance. Authorized personnel only." The silence of the inner corridor hit him like a punch. He walked fast, his shoes echoing off the concrete walls. Behind him, the metal door rattled under the persistent investor's fists. Vance spotted a gray metal cabin with folding doors. Without thinking, he stepped in and pressed the only button available. The freight elevator didn't rise with the velvet smoothness of his office lift. It jerked violently, sending Vance's stomach straight up to his throat. The steel cable groaned, metal chewing on metal, and the billionaire grabbed the railing with both hands, feeling the cold iron cut through his palms. "What in the?" he muttered. As the elevator descended into the depths, the event map had never shown. The doors opened with a sinister groan. Vance stepped out into a vast basement where the temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. The smell of champagne and expensive perfume was replaced by the heavy scent of old dust, mothballs, and oil. He walked between endless rows of iron shelving. On them, hundreds of mannequins draped in white sheets rested like an army of motionless ghosts. Under the dim light of fluorescent bulbs blinking in a nervous rhythm, the shadows of the sheets seemed to stretch and reach for Vance's immaculate suit. He ducked around a wooden arm jutting from a shelf, his heart beating a rhythm no spreadsheet could have predicted. He turned right, then left, but the labyrinth of silk and wood seemed to close in around him. "James?" he called out, his voice sounding small and strange in that fashion graveyard. "Is this someone's idea of a joke?" A metallic sound sliced through the silence. Clang! Vance froze. It came from behind a stack of wooden crates stamped with fragile seals. He moved closer, his steps now cautious, the soles of his shoes scraping against the concrete floor beneath a thin layer of soot. "Stupid gear." A woman's voice, raspy and loaded with genuine irritation, echoed between the shelves. "If you drop that bolt right now, I swear I'll turn you into scrap metal before breakfast." Vance rounded the last shelf and stopped. There, beneath the carcass of a colossal metal structure that looked like a cross between a dinosaur skeleton and an airplane engine, crouched a figure. Then, a beam of white, violent light hit Vance directly in the eyes. He threw his hand up to shield his vision, stumbling backward and nearly knocking over a plaster mannequin that watched him with hollow, empty eyes. "Who's the idiot wandering around my work area?" The headlamp beam didn't move. "If you're from the catering crew looking for ice, I'll go ahead and warn you. The freight elevator is on strike, and so is my patience." Vance blinked, the colored spots still dancing across his retinas. The light tilted down slightly, revealing Tess's face. She was covered in a layer of grease that looked like war paint. Her bun had come apart so completely it resembled a stressed bird's nest, and she was holding a wrench like it was an iron scepter. "You?" Vance exhaled, straightening his jacket with an automatic defensive reflex. "You're the one responsible for this horror movie basement?" "I'm Vance Sterling. I demand to be escorted to the main hall immediately." Tess let out a dry laugh that sounded like sand caught in a gear. She stood up, and Vance noticed she was smaller than the shadow she cast, but her presence filled every inch of the room. "Oh, So the luxury penguin took a wrong turn and missed the igloo? She walked toward him, the headlamp lighting up the trail of dust his shoes had left across her clean floor. You're in the basement, Sterling, where the real work happens while you people sip sparkling water and pretend you understand art up there. Don't call me a penguin, Vance growled, pulling back some of his corporate authority. I fund this museum. I pay for the air you breathe down here. Now, point me to the exit, or you'll what? Fire me. Tess stepped forward, and the scent of metal and honest sweat hit Vance's nose. I'm the only person in 3 states who knows how to keep the Empress's gown from collapsing on the model in front of a national broadcast. You pull me out of here, and your investment turns into a pile of old rags in 10 minutes flat. Vance opened his mouth to fire back, but a sharp crack rang out from the structure behind Tess. A stream of white-hot vapor began escaping from a bronze valve. Come on. Tess spun on her heels, forgetting Vance in an instant. The pressure is climbing. The secondary piston won't hold. She dove back under the metal, wrestling with the wrench. Vance stood there, frozen. He watched her hand tremble under the effort, saw the vein in her neck pulse as she struggled to hold a lever that looked like it weighed a ton. Sterling, she shouted, her voice muffled by the hiss of steam. If you want to walk out of here without your suit melted by 300-degree steam, stop posing for your own statue and hold this plate, now! Vance looked at his own hands, looked at his silk suit. He calculated the losses, he calculated the risk. And then he remembered his mother's eyes. Find the soul in things. With a roar of frustration, he threw his $2,000 jacket over a ghostly mannequin and plunged into the grease. The master of logistics had just entered a route with no return. The Sterling algorithm was about to collide with Tess's reality, and the result wouldn't be a profit spreadsheet. It would be an explosion of sparks and oil. Vance Sterling's gala night was over the moment he touched that hot metal. His life, however, was just starting to heat up. The crack of Vance's knee hitting the cold concrete rang out like a gunshot in the silence of the basement. He didn't lower himself slowly. He collapsed into action, feeling the expensive fabric of his trousers stretch and give. His hands, the hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, plunged into the cold, viscous grease at the base of the metal structure. The thermal shock of frozen metal against warm skin made his teeth grind, while the thick smell of oil and ancient dust flooded his lungs, pushing out every trace of French cologne. Up above, Tess didn't break her rhythm for a second. She was a silhouette of shadows and light, balanced at the top of a mechanical ladder that groaned with every adjustment she made. She was stretched out, half her body buried in the guts of the machine, one hand gripping a pair of pliers, and the other trying to stabilize a support plate that vibrated with a fury all its own. Are you going to stand there measuring the dust coefficient on my floor? Or are you actually going to be useful, Sterling? Tess's shout came down from the top of the ladder like a crack of a whip. She didn't even look at him. Her focus was locked on a bolt that kept spinning uselessly in place. A drop of sweat ran down her temple, carving a clean path through the soot on her face, and fell directly onto one of the bronze gears. I don't take orders from people who wear headlamps as fashion accessories, Vance fired back, his voice trying to recapture the commanding tone that usually silenced boardrooms. I'm the CEO of Sterling Logistics. I move nations. I don't... Oh, great, there it is again. Tess cut him off with a laugh that sounded like metal scraping stone. If you move nations, you can move 2 inches of steel without passing out. Step off that invisible pedestal and hold this base right now. If this support tilts 1 more millimeter, 5,000 hours of history and your mother's dream turn to glass dust in less than a second. Vance stopped cold. The mention of Vera landed directly in the center of his defense algorithm. He looked at the base of the structure. It was a block of cast iron, coated in a thick black grease that seemed to have a life of its own. The oil oozed slowly, pooling in a puddle that reflected the yellow glow of the fluorescent lights. This is filthy, he murmured, watching a drop of oil leap up and land on the toe of his patent leather shoe. These shoes were custom-made in Milan. And this gown was made by your family's soul in 1972. Tess shouted, and this time she looked down, Her eyes blazed with an intensity that made Vance take a step back. "I'm the woman who will sue you for historical negligence if this piece breaks." "Hold it!" A sudden heat crawled up Vance's neck. Not anger, something he hadn't felt in decades, the raw instinct to solve a crisis. He pushed past the smell of mothballs saturating the air and stepped forward. He crouched down, feeling the expensive fabric of his trousers stretch dangerously. His hands, the hands that signed billion-dollar contracts, plunged into the cold, viscous grease at the base of the metal structure. The thermal shock of frozen metal against warm skin made his teeth grind. He locked his fingers around the support beam, feeling the violent vibration of the machine travel up his arms, rise through his shoulders, and slam into the base of his skull. He started, straining with everything he had to hold the base in place. "This is physically impossible. The torque on this structure is completely outside any safety standard." "Welcome to the real world, where things don't follow your instruction manuals," Tess said, her voice now a little lower, fully concentrated. "Don't let go, Penguin. If you give out now, the glass structure goes into cascade collapse. It's like a house of cards, just much more expensive and a whole lot louder." Vance felt sweat starting to form on his forehead. A drop rolled down and stung his eye, but he didn't dare release his grip. He watched Tess's technique from below. She moved with an economy of motion he had only ever seen in elite surgeons or high-precision machines. She didn't fight the metal. She seemed to have a conversation with it through the wrench. "Why do you do this?" Vance asked, his voice faltering as the weight of the structure seemed to double. "With your technical knowledge, you could be designing satellites or defense systems. Why are you down here, covered in oil, taking care of an old dress?" Tess made a final adjustment, a sharp, dry, metallic click that echoed through the basement. She paused for a moment and looked at her calloused hands, then up at the crystals gleaming above her. "Satellites are just pieces of metal floating in a vacuum," she replied, and there was a note of vulnerability she tried to bury under a sarcastic tone. This is proof that beauty can be tough. It's engineering with a heart, Sterling. The kind your computer would probably delete to free up memory." Silence settled between them, broken only by the low hiss of steam. Vance looked at his own hands, completely black with grease. He noticed that his $1 million jacket, tossed over the mannequin beside him, looked like a lifeless museum piece. While he, filthy and exhausted, felt his heart beating with a furious, living energy. "Pressure stabilized," Tess announced, climbing down the ladder with the agility of a cat. "You can let go, but do it slowly. Release all at once, and the thermal shock will crack the crystal." Vance obeyed. He pulled his hands away centimeter by centimeter. When he finally stood, his legs trembled. He took in the state of himself, the suit ruined, the white shirt now a map of oil stains, his face looking like it had just come out of a coal mine. Tess stopped in front of him. She was much shorter, but he had the feeling she was seeing him completely, without the shield of his CEO title. She held out a greasy, filthy rag. "Congratulations, Sterling," Tess said with a half-smile that cracked the hardness of her face. "You just saved the night. Now try not to trip over your own ego on the way out." Floor still slippery. Vance took the rag, but instead of wiping his hands, he looked at the dress structure. For the first time, he didn't see an investment variable. He saw what his mother had wanted him to see: the invisible effort, the passionate skill, the soul of someone who simply refused the word impossible. He opened his mouth to fire something back, but the silence was broken by a new hiss rising from the core of the machine. Vance and Tess exchanged a quick look. The truce was over. The real restoration work, the kind that would demand total synchronization, was only just beginning. The world upstairs could wait. Down here, history was still in danger. Time in the museum basement wasn't measured by the ticking of gold watches, but by the rhythmic pulse of bronze gears and the persistent hiss of steam escaping the joints of the glass gown. There, between shadows and flickering fluorescent lights, Manhattan's social hierarchy had been swallowed whole by technical necessity. There was no longer a CEO and a restoration specialist. There were only two gears trying to stop a mechanical disaster of historic proportions. Vance was on his knees, chest pressed against the steel chassis. He wasn't looking at the oil stains decorating his linen shirt like an abstract print of despair anymore. His eyes were locked on the pressure gauge, his mind processing data flows with the same speed he used to manage shipping fleets in Rotterdam. The compression curve is climbing 2% every 10 seconds, Tess. Vance shouted, his voice vibrating right along with the metal. The relief valve is blocked. At this rate, the saturation point hits the crystal base in less than 3 minutes. Up on the ladder, Tess didn't answer with words. She answered with the metallic sound of a pair of pliers biting into a copper wire. Her movements were a dance of raw precision. She leaned out over the abyss of gears, body stretched to its limit, the headlamp cutting through the labyrinth of glass and metal below. Vance watched her hands for a half-second. They told a story no financial report could ever summarize. Fast, steady, scarred from welding, calloused from a lifetime of never letting theory beat practice. For the first time in his life, Vance felt a sharp pang of something he couldn't calculate. Not the hollow flirtation of gala ballrooms. An electric admiration for someone who completely commanded their own chaos. "Sterling, stop analyzing and move," Tess ordered, throwing a box wrench down to him. Vance caught it out of the air, the heavy metal nearly sliding right out of his grease-coated fingers. "Use that logistics brain of yours," she shouted, wiping sweat off her forehead with her shoulder. "Balance the counterweights on the base while I rerun the core wiring. If the base shifts, the glass cracks. Go." Vance dove in. He applied the load distribution logic that had made him a billionaire. He no longer saw a dress. He saw a high-complexity delivery system. He adjusted the lead weights on the base with a force that made the muscles in his back protest in agony. Every movement was calculated, every gram of pressure distributed to preserve the piece's fragile equilibrium. They worked in a raw, unspoken synchrony. Where she made the fine adjustments, he held the stability. Where she needed force, he put his shoulder against the steel. There was no room for lingering looks or soft words. The romance being written here was spelled out in torque, tension, and the resistance of materials. "Reconnecting the main line in 3, 2, 1, Tess announced, joining 2 wires that erupted in a cascade of blue sparks. The sparks lit up Vance's face for a brief instant, revealing a smile of pure concentration. He felt more alive beneath that iron carcass than at any board meeting at the top of his glass tower. "Connection stable," Vance called back, feeling the vibration of the machine soften under his hands. Pressure flow returning to normal. 80%, 70, 60. Tess came down the ladder with the urgency of someone who still didn't trust the victory. She stopped beside him, breathing hard, the smell of ozone and oil hanging between them. She looked at Vance's work on the base, then at him. "Not bad for a luxury algorithm," she murmured, and there was a note of genuine respect in her voice worth more to Vance than any Entrepreneur of the Year award. "I told you I move nations," Vance fired back, trying to wipe his face with his shirt sleeve, only managing to spread more grease across his skin. "A dress is just a smaller, louder nation." Tess let out a short laugh. The first real sound of joy Vance had heard in that basement. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe a truce, maybe a friendly insult, but fate, as always, hated silence. Beep, 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 beep. A sharp, piercing alarm began echoing off the concrete walls. The central pressure gauge, sitting comfortably in the safe green zone just seconds ago, suddenly swung its needle with terrifying force, slamming straight into the red. "What? No!" Tess went pale, the headlamp trembling. The hydraulic pressure on the main support just collapsed. The centerpiece has no support. The colossal glass gown structure let out a dry crack, like a branch snapping. The chassis began tilting left, threatening to topple over the plaster mannequins. "Vance! Don't let go!" Tess screamed, lunging for an emergency lever that seemed to be jammed. "If you release that base right now, everything shatters. Hold it with your life." Vance planted his feet on the slippery concrete floor. He threw his arms around the filthy metal base, feeling the full weight of 5,000 hours of history crushing down on him. The veins in his forehead stood out, sweat burned in his eyes, and his shirt tore clean across both shoulders. The master of data had found a problem that couldn't be solved with a software update. The weight of beauty was heavier than any cargo he had ever transported. And the only thing standing between history and disaster was a man who had just discovered that his heart didn't beat in binary code, but in the desperate rhythm of a fight he absolutely could not lose. The museum basement had become a chamber of mechanical torture. The alarm was no longer just a sound, it was a physical pulse reverberating in Vance Sterling's chest. He was no longer the man who watched the world from a glass penthouse. He was the flesh and bone support beam of a 2-ton structure threatening to crush history. The sweat running down his face carried the salt of exhaustion and the metallic taste of grease, tracing a gray trail across his pale skin. Vance had his arms wrapped around the iron base, the muscles in his back screaming under a tension no luxury gym could ever simulate. His feet slid on the wet concrete, and he clenched his jaw so hard he felt it throb. "Sterling, don't you dare give out!" Tess's shout came from somewhere above, muffled by the hiss of steam. "If you drop that support right now, I'm going to have to scoop up your pieces and the gowns with a shovel." She was hanging off a side beam, trying to realign the hydraulic piston that kept spitting oil. Her hands were trembling, but her movements stayed precise. She glanced down and saw Vance's face turning red, the veins in his neck bulging like the strings of an instrument about to snap. "Talk to me, Penguin," she commanded, her voice losing some of its edge and picking up a note of genuine human urgency. "Say anything, but don't black out on me. Why is a guy like you, who probably has someone tie his shoes for him, down here killing himself for a piece of glass and silk?" Vance let out a growling exhale of effort, air escaping his lungs in short bursts. "I don't walk away from contracts," he managed, every word a battle against gravity. "And I promised someone that I'd find the soul in things tonight." Tess stopped for one fraction of a second. The pliers in her hand hesitated in front of a wire. She let out a short laugh, but this time there was no mockery in it. "Soul in things, huh?" She went back to work with renewed fury. "Funny. I once knew a woman who said the exact same thing. The kind of woman who walks into an orphanage in Queens and decides that a stubborn girl with grease under her nails deserves a shot at engineering school instead of a reformatory." Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the basement. The weight of the machine seemed to shrink in front of the weight of her words. "Her name was Vera," Tess continued, her voice now going soft. A startling contrast against the chaos around her. "She paid for every book, every tool. She told me the world is full of people who want to be the window display, but what it desperately needs are people who take care of what nobody sees. The structure, the foundation, what actually holds up the shine from above." Vance's heart skipped a beat. He looked up, trying to make out Tess's face through the haze of steam and flickering lights. He saw his mother's legacy, not in a building with the Sterling name on it, not in a bank account, but in the technical courage and the untamable heart of the woman who had been calling him an idiot for the past 2 hours. "Vera," Vance murmured, her name leaving his lips like a prayer of shock. She's the only reason I didn't let you get crushed by that freight elevator." Tess cut him off, applying a final torque to the piston. "I do this for her, because she believed beauty deserves to be defended, even if you end the night smelling like diesel oil and disappointment." Vance opened his mouth. The truth burned in his throat. He needed to tell her that he was the algorithm Vera had tried to save. He wanted to say that the luxury penguin was the son of the woman who had saved her. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for the revelation that would change everything between them. "Tess, listen," he started, his voice suddenly finding clarity. "I'm not just a lost investor. Vera is my Habu." A dry explosion cut through the air. A high-pressure pipe hidden behind the support plate Vance had his arms wrapped around burst with the violence of a cannon shot. It wasn't steam. It was a solid, black, viscous jet of recycled hydraulic oil. The jet hit Vance square in the chest, snapping his head back and coating his face in a mask of oily darkness. Tess, caught by the ricochet, took a hit on her shoulder and the side of her face. In an instant, the last shred of visual dignity either of them had left vanished beneath a layer of grease that gleamed like crude oil under the trembling lights. Vance staggered, blinded by the oil burning in his eyes. But his arms, through pure instinct or some ancestral command from Vera, stayed locked around the metal base. Darn it, Tess shouted, slipping on the pool of oil forming instantly on the floor. Sterling, are you still there? I didn't let go, Vance shouted back, wiping the oil from his eyes with his shoulder, only spreading the black stain further across a shirt that had once cost the price of a decent car. He looked like a pitch-black specter, a nightmare figure that had crawled up from the depths of the museum. But through the mask of oil, his eyes burned with a determination that had never once appeared in any of his Forbes photographs. The truth had been swallowed by a sea of black oil. Vera's secret remained suspended in the air, mixing with the sharp smell of burnt rubber and metal under pressure. Vance Sterling had never been this filthy, this humiliated, or this visually ridiculous in his entire life. And yet, as he held that grimy machine with everything he had left, he had never been closer to understanding what his mother truly wanted him to find. The museum basement now resembled the deck of an oil tanker in the middle of an iron storm. The hydraulic oil, black and thick as cursed honey, coated every inch of concrete, turning the floor into a skating rink. The air was saturated with the sharp smell of burnt rubber and the metallic bite of pressurized fluid. Vance Sterling, the man who commanded empires from the top of skyscrapers, was now crouched in the partial darkness, looking like a tar statue that had just come to life. The oil jet kept hammering the structure with the sound of a wet whip. Vance felt the viscous liquid seeping under his collar, tracing cold, sticky paths down his back. "Sterling, where's that silk armor you were wearing?" Tess's shout sliced through the noise of the leak. She was trying to balance on a beam, but her work boots slid on the grease like ice skates. Vance looked to his side. The $2,000 jacket, a masterpiece of Italian tailoring, rested on the mannequin, looking like the ghost of a life that no longer belonged to him. For 1 second, the cost-benefit algorithm in his brain calculated the value of that piece. In the next second, he reached out, grabbed the fine fabric, and tore it off the mannequin with a dry protest from its seams. "Take this," Vance shouted, hurling the jacket toward the core of the leak. He didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, feeling oil soak through his knees, and pressed the luxury jacket directly against the burst pipe. The silk and wool fabric absorbed the black crude instantly, turning into a heavy, filthy rag beneath his hands. "You're using a Sterling original as a cleaning rag?" Tess asked, dropping off the beam with an acrobatic jump that ended in disaster. Her feet hit the oil puddle and lost all traction. Tess's world spun. She let out a short cry as her body was launched backward. Vance, still pressing the pipe with one hand, threw out his other arm on pure preservation instinct. The impact was solid. Tess's body hit Vance's chest with the force of a small delivery van. He staggered, his back slamming against the steel chassis of the machine, but he held on. They were now both drenched, stuck to each other by a layer of grease acting as organic glue. Tess's face was inches from his. She had an oil smear on the tip of her nose, and her eyes blazed with a shock that had nothing to do with mechanics. The silence lasted exactly 1 accelerated heartbeat. "You know, Sterling," Tess murmured, her warm breath hitting his neck mixed with the smell of oil. "If your goal was to impress me with your mechanical bear hug, you could have skipped the crude oil bath." Vance tried to recover his composure, but his feet slid and he dropped a few inches, dragging Tess down with him. I was just trying to keep you from becoming a permanent stain on the floor," Vance fired back, his voice rough. "And for your information, this hug cost the equivalent of a small truck fleet, considering the state of my suit." Tess let out a full, vibrating laugh that echoed off the iron beams. She braced herself on his shoulders, but instead of pulling away, she steadied herself. "Perfect. Since you paid so dearly for this moment, make yourself useful," she ordered, all her technical authority slamming back like a sledgehammer. "Hold still. Use your legs. I need a human step stool to reach the manual shutoff valve above that beam. You want me to." Vance started, but before he finished the sentence, he felt Tess's boot pressing down on his right shoulder. He locked his knees, feeling her weight and the pressure of the metal against his back. His shirt finally tore for good under the strain, the shoulder seams giving out with a sound of total surrender. He was now the foundation of a restoration specialist trying to save the world with a screwdriver. From up above, Tess stretched out, her fingers reaching a bronze handwheel covered in dust. She turned it with everything her calloused arms had. The sound of metal grinding on metal filled the basement. Almost just one more inch. She ground through her teeth. Vance looked up. Through the haze of oil and sweat, he could make out Tess's determined profile against the yellow light. And then he laughed. A short, dry laugh that rose from deep in a chest that had only ever carried spreadsheets. "What's so funny, Penguin? Have the fumes finally gotten to you?" Tess asked, still wrestling with the valve. "My tailor." Vance managed between laughs. He'd have a full cardiac arrest if he saw me turn a Milanese masterpiece into a workshop step stool. "Welcome to the land of the living, Sterling," Tess shouted, and with one final snap the valve gave way. The hiss of steam stopped instantly. The oil jet shut off, dropping to a slow, rhythmic drip on the concrete. The silence that followed was thick, almost solid. Tess climbed down from Vance's shoulder, sliding gently until her feet touched the ground, one hand still resting on his chest to keep from falling. There they stood, in the center of the disaster, coated in tar, exhausted, the glass gown gleaming above them like a silent survivor. The moment was real, visceral. The engineering with a heart Vera had spoken of. Vance looked at Tess, and every sarcastic thing in his throat died before reaching his lips. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the vulnerability she kept buried beneath her iron shell. He lifted his hand to pull an oil-soaked strand of hair away from her forehead. "Tess, I need to tell you." Click. The magnetic snap of a tripped circuit breaker echoed through the entire museum. The fluorescent bulbs flickered one last time and went out. The emergency lights, already running on fumes, shut off right behind them. Total darkness. The basement was swallowed by a blackness so deep it seemed to have weight. The world was gone. No museum, no gala, no billionaire, no restoration specialist. In the absolute void of the basement, all that remained were two hearts beating in mismatched rhythms and the lingering smell of a battle that had just been won. Silence was the only witness to a truth that was about to be whispered in the dark, where eyes couldn't judge and the soul could no longer hide. The silence in the museum basement was absolute, broken only by the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance, and the rhythmic pulse of gala music filtering down from the ceiling, reaching Vance and Tess like the heartbeat of a giant, indifferent world. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a heavy curtain that erased every hierarchy. There, covered in oil and sweat, the billionaire and the worker no longer existed. All that remained were two unsteady breaths, trying to find the center of a world that had just collapsed. Vance felt the warmth of Tess's body a few inches from his. The smell of ozone, grease, and expensive soaked linen created a dense, almost electric atmosphere. "Sterling? Are your hands still on that support, or did you decide to take a luxury nap in the dark?" Tess's voice came out low, stripped of its usual armor of sarcasm. "My hands are fused to this metal, Tess," Vance answered, his voice echoing deep through the void. "I think I'm now officially part of the museum's infrastructure. Go ahead and catalog me as the Tar Man of Manhattan." A small click cut through the darkness. Tess switched on her headlamp, but the battery was dying. The beam was weak and yellowish, lighting only a narrow circle between the two of them. She stepped closer. Vance saw the glimmer of her eyes through the trembling light. She raised her hand, and for a second he braced himself for a technical order or an insult, but felt only the rough, warm touch of a cotton cloth against his cheek. Tess began wiping the grease from his face. Her movements were slow, almost deliberate. She removed the black mask that had been covering Vance's eyes, uncovering the intensity of a blue that had been hidden beneath all the grime. "Why are you still here, Vance?" she asked, using his first name for the first time, and the sound made his chest vibrate more than any hydraulic engine. "I saw your hands. You're shaking. Your back must be on fire. A man who smells like money and private jets shouldn't be down here getting dirty for a dress he could buy and burn just for fun. Why didn't you call your security team and run the moment that first bolt snapped?" Vance closed his eyes, feeling the cloth move gently across his skin. The silence stretched out, filled only by the distant sound of the party far above. "Because for the first time in 10 years, I'm not moving numbers on a screen. Vance confessed, his voice carrying a vulnerability he had never once allowed out of his glass tower. I've spent my life building systems that are invisible, Tess. Logistics, flows, algorithms, none of it you can touch. None of it has a soul. But tonight, holding that filthy support, feeling the weight of all that history on my shoulders, I feel like I'm building something that can't be sold. Something real. Tess stopped moving the cloth. Her hand stayed on his face, her calloused fingers brushing his jaw. That's the engineering with a heart Vera talked about, isn't it? She whispered. It's the lesson I should have learned a long time ago, he answered, opening his eyes and finding hers. I didn't come here to save the dress, Tess. I came because Vera knew I needed to be saved from myself. The air between them hit a point of saturation. Everything felt thinned out. Tess tilted her head, the weak headlamp beam catching his lips, still smeared with oil. You're an idiot, Sterling, she murmured, a half-smile appearing. A very expensive and very dirty idiot, and you're the most insufferable and brilliant woman who's ever crossed my algorithm, he fired back, bringing his face closer to hers. The moment was interrupted, not by a word, but by a sudden tremor in the floor. The sound of the main generator roaring back to life echoed like the growl of a waking beast. The fluorescent lights above them flickered, fighting through the vacuum, then exploded back in a blinding white blaze. The two of them instinctively pulled apart, shielding their eyes from the sudden brightness. The museum's elevation system, now fed by restored power, began to hum. Bronze gears turned with oily smoothness, and the support Vance had been holding with everything he had was quietly taken over by the automatic hydraulic pistons. Vance stumbled back, his arms finally free, dropping to his knees on the slippery floor. He looked up and lost his breath. The glass gown, free from haze and steam, blazed under the white lights. Thousands of crystal fragments caught the electricity and turned it into a wildfire of light. The central piece, which minutes ago had been a threatening metal carcass, now floated majestically, ready to be raised to the main hall. It was a sight of absolute triumph. It's safe, Tess said, wiping sweat from her forehead and looking at the work of her life. We did it, Penguin. Vance rose slowly, ignoring the pain in every muscle. He looked at Tess, who shone just as brightly as the gown, even covered in grease. He opened his mouth to finally tell her that Vera was his mother. That he was the Sterling of Sterling Logistics. That he wanted to take her out for the strongest coffee in the city right now. The lights were back, but so was the cold reality. The gown was ready to rise to the stage where the cameras and glamour were waiting. In the blinding shine of their triumph, the connection forged in the darkness was facing its first test. The world upstairs was calling, and it didn't allow oil-covered people. The sound arrived first. A muffled thunder of applause and astonished exclamations pushing through the concrete ceiling like a shockwave. Up above, beneath crystal chandeliers and the fragrance of French perfume, the glass gown had just risen from the floor, emerging at the center of the hall like a divine apparition. For Manhattan's elite, it was pure magic. For the two grease-covered figures in the basement, it was the result of torque, sweat, and one sacrificed silk jacket. Vance and Tess stood side by side in the shadows, watching the freight elevator rise until it disappeared into the light of the hall above. The opening in the ceiling revealed, for one brief moment, a parade of immaculate tuxedos and gowns worth small fortunes. Vance looked at himself. He was a human map of disaster. His white shirt, now gray and glued to his skin, had a tear running from his shoulder to his waist. His face looked like it had been painted by a coal miner, and he could still feel the hydraulic oil draining down into his ruined patent leather shoes. "You hear that, Penguin?" Tess asked, wiping down a wrench with a piece of cloth. Ironically, the only clean thing left in the basement. That's the sound of 5,000 hours of history being saved by a disaster-prone billionaire and an orphan with a headlamp. Vance didn't answer right away. He felt his phone vibrating in his pants pocket. He pulled it out with pitch-black fingers, smearing the sapphire screen. It lit up with 30 missed calls and a string of urgent messages about the $10 billion merger he was supposed to be signing right now. The names of directors and investors flashed like warning signals from a world that felt light years away. With a calm, deliberate movement, Vance slid his finger across the screen and turned the phone off. The silence that settled in his pocket afterward was the most satisfying of his entire career. "Aren't you going up?" Vance asked, pocketing the phone. "The lights are on. The stage is yours. You're the woman who made the impossible happen. Don't you want the applause?" Tess stopped organizing her tools. She dropped the wrench into the metal box with a dry, definitive clang. She looked up at the sliver of light slowly closing as the elevator returned. "My work ends where the flashbulbs begin, Sterling," she replied, and there was a dignity in her voice that made the gala hall above feel small and meaningless. "The shine is for people who need validation. I prefer the sound of a gear running perfectly. I go where the coffee is strong, the engineers don't wear tuxedos, and nobody knows the price of my last name." She closed the toolbox with a snap and started walking toward the service door, a heavy iron structure that led to the museum's side alley. "And where exactly is that place?" Vance asked, taking a step forward and ignoring the throbbing in his muscles. "I think I might need some of that coffee. Honestly, I feel like if I drink something that costs under $50, my body might finally remember what it means to be human." Tess stopped with her hand on the rusty door handle. She turned, the yellow light of the service corridor catching her profile, still marked by grease. She gave a half smile, that same defiant gleam that, hours ago under the glass entrance ceiling, had disarmed Vance's arrogance before they'd even exchanged a single word. It was the smile of someone who knew secrets his money could never buy. "Engineer's Corner on 3rd and Main," she said. "It's the only place in the city where motor oil is the official cologne and nobody's going to ask you about your stock portfolio. But one warning, CEO." "What?" Vance asked, feeling an anticipation no billion-dollar merger had ever given him. "Don't show up in a suit," she said, nodding at what was left of what he was wearing. "My friends will think you're there to foreclose on the building or collect back rent. Wear something that doesn't require life insurance." Tess pushed the door open. The cold Manhattan night air rolled into the basement, carrying the sound of traffic and the smell of wet asphalt. She walked out without looking back, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Vance stood alone for a moment. He walked over to a piece of tempered glass left over from a broken display case and looked at his reflection. He saw a dirty man, suit ruined, hair a mess, oil stains that looked like battle scars. He had never been more visually humiliated in his life, and yet he realized he was smiling, a real smile, one that reached his now clean blue eyes. He didn't see a defeated CEO, he saw Vera's son, the man who had finally understood that the value of things isn't in what they show, but in what they hold up. The king of Manhattan had lost his silk crown, but found something far more durable, the torque of his own soul. The gala hall above was applauding the glass, not knowing that the real work of art was walking out the back door, smelling like diesel oil and carrying in his chest a promise written in a corner coffee shop. The early hours on Fifth Avenue carry a silence only old libraries and stone mansions understand. The hallway of the Sterling mansion was a tunnel of flawless marble and softly glowing recessed lights, a violent contrast to the dark industrial basement Vance had just crawled out of. His footsteps sounded different now, not the sharp click of luxury shoes, but a muffled, heavy sound, accompanied by the damp creak of ruined leather, leaving a trail of dark marks across a priceless Persian rug. Vance walked down the hallway, ignoring the stunned look of the night-duty private nurse, who pressed herself against the wall at the sight of the Sterling Empire's heir in that state. Vance was something out of a disaster film. His white shirt, now a mosaic of dark and gray stains, was glued to his chest. His arms were marked by metal scratches, and his fingers still carried tar under the nails. He smelled of hydraulic oil and burnt rubber, a scent of reality that desecrated the sterile atmosphere of that house. He pushed open the double doors of Vera's room with the flat of his hand, leaving a dark, permanent fingerprint on the polished silver handle. The room was dimly lit, bathed only in the blue glow of the cardiac monitors tracing the slow, steady rhythm of his mother's life. Vera Sterling was awake, propped against her pillows, a 1974 fashion sketch resting on her lap. She raised her eyes when the door opened. "Vance?" Her voice was a fragile whisper, but it carried a razor-sharp clarity. She looked him over from head to toe. Vera's gaze moved across the expensive suit turned to rags, the oil stains on her son's face, and the faint tremor in his exhausted hands. The silence in the room was filled only by the soft beeping of the machines. Vera didn't ask what had happened. She wasn't startled by the filth. Instead, a slow, triumphant smile lit up her pale face. "You smell like effort, Vance," she said, and there was a note of pride in her voice he hadn't heard since childhood. When he used to build houses of cards, she always insisted on blowing down. "It's the most wonderful smell that's ever entered this room." Vance walked to the edge of the bed. He ignored the leather armchair, and in a movement that broke decades of Sterling protocol, he dropped to his knees on the cold floor beside her. He rested his arms on the edge of the mattress, staining the Egyptian linen sheets with the museum's grease. "I met her, Mother," Vance said, his voice coming out rough and deep. "I met Tess." Vera reached out, her paper-thin veins showing through the skin, and touched her son's face. Her fingers came away black, but she didn't care. She stroked his skin as if she were cleaning a precious work of art that had spent too long buried under layers of dust. "And?" Vera asked, her eyes bright. "Did she call you an idiot in the first minute, or did she give you a full 5 minutes of grace?" Vance let out a short laugh, a vibration that shook his tired shoulders. 30 seconds, actually," he admitted. "She called me a luxury penguin and used me as a human step stool to reach a bronze valve. I used my favorite jacket as a rag to stop a recycled oil leak." Vera closed her eyes for a moment, taking it all in. "Good," she murmured. "Luxury is just what we show the world to keep it at a distance, Vance. But real value, the kind that matters, is what holds the world up when nobody's watching. It's the grease, the sweat, the torque that nobody ever applauds." Vance looked at his dirty hands, the full weight of the night finally settling into his mind. He understood now why his mother had sent him to that basement. It wasn't to save the glass gown. It was so he could see that while he'd been up there moving billions in the abstract, people like Tess had been down below, making sure the floor didn't give out. "I get it, Mother," Vance whispered, lowering his head until his forehead rested against her hand. "I get that I was the algorithm and she was the life, and that life asks you to get dirty every now and then." Vera smiled, her mission finally complete. She pulled her hand from his face and pointed to the phone he'd set on the nightstand, now smeared with grime. "The world out there is going to try to clean you up tomorrow, my son," she warned. "They'll want the CEO back, the immaculate suit and the icy soul. What are you going to do about that?" Vance stood up. He felt every muscle in his back protest, a physical reminder that he was made of flesh, not data. He picked up the phone. The screen lit up, revealing hundreds of notifications, contracts, mergers, market crises. He didn't open the emails. He didn't return the investors' calls. With his fingers still stained, he opened the Maps app and typed in 5 words that now meant more to him than any billion-dollar portfolio. Engineer's Corner, 3rd and Main. Vance Sterling's truth wasn't in the spreadsheets he'd left behind, or in the fortune waiting for him at dawn. It was in the grease trail he left on the white linen, and in the quickened beat of a heart that had finally learned how to work under pressure. The night was ending, but for the man who had learned to be a human step-stool, the day was just beginning. The light of dawn in Manhattan isn't golden like in the movies. It's a pale, cold blue that cuts through the shadows between skyscrapers, revealing the city in its rawest form. At the corner of 3rd and Main, the neon sign of the Engineer's Corner flickered with a persistent electric hum, throwing a bluish glow over the rain puddles pooled on the asphalt below. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of extremely dark roasted coffee beans and the nostalgic smell of sawdust and machine oil. Tess was sitting on a high stool at the worn wooden counter. She had traded her dirty coveralls for cargo pants and a black tank top, but the grease marks under her nails remained, worn like medals of honor. Her eyes, once fixed on gears and valves, now watched the steam rising from her chipped ceramic mug. She was alone and quiet, processing the fact that just a few hours ago she had held the weight of 2 centuries of history in her hands. The bell above the door rang, a sharp, metallic sound that made Tess turn instinctively. Through the door walked a man New York City wouldn't recognize on any magazine cover. Vance Sterling was no longer wearing the ruined tuxedo, or the Italian silk shirt that had ended the night as a workshop rag. He wore simple dark jeans, a black t-shirt that emphasized shoulders still stiff from physical effort, and a canvas jacket that looked like it had been bought at the first department store he found open. He walked with a slight stiffness in his back, a reminder that being a human step stool comes with a physical price, but his blue eyes were sharp, clear, and for the first time, seemed to be seeing reality without the filter of a computer screen. Vance walked up to the counter and set down a second mug of coffee, ordered on his way in, next to Tess's. The liquid was dark, thick, and gave off a warmth that seemed to promise a cure for any exhaustion. "You were right about the logistics here, Tess," Vance said, his voice coming out soft, stripped of the cold authority it had carried at the museum entrance. "The caffeine flow is optimized, and honestly, it's the best coffee I've had in this city." Tess looked him up and down, a half-smile beginning to form. She noticed that, despite being clean, he still had a nearly invisible smear of oil behind his right ear. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, her usual sharpness now seasoned with a note of respect. "You survived the night, CEO, and you even managed to dress like a regular human being. Where'd you leave the luxury penguin? In the museum basement?" Vance let out a genuine laugh, a sound that wasn't trying to impress anyone. He sat down on the stool next to her, feeling the warmth of the mug between his hands. "The penguin didn't know how to deal with hydraulic oil leaks," Vance admitted, looking at his own reflection in the dark surface of the coffee. "He was excellent at designing the future, but completely useless at holding up the present. I decided to leave him down there, along with what was left of that jacket." Tess tilted her head, studying his profile under the blue neon light. "Vera told me once that some people need the whole world to fall on their heads before they finally realize the ground is solid," Tess said, her voice going serious for a brief moment. "I think tonight the museum's glass ceiling came down on you, Sterling." Vance turned to face her. The connection that had started in the absolute darkness of the basement solidified right there, between the smell of coffee and the rumble of a garbage truck rolling past outside. "I didn't get to tell you down there, Tess," he started, his hand grazing hers on the wooden counter. "But Vera, she's not just the woman who paid for your education. She's the reason I spent my whole life trying to be perfect. She's my mother." The silence that followed wasn't one of shock. It was a deep understanding that clicked into place like a perfectly fitting gear. Tess didn't widen her eyes. She simply let out a long breath, as if a complex equation had finally been solved. "That explains a lot," she murmured, smiling. "It explains why you're so stubborn, and why you didn't let go of that support, even when the oil was burning through your lungs. You've got her blood, Vance. The blood of someone who builds the foundation." The two of them sat there, talking about restoration techniques, about the fragility of glass and the invisible strength of iron structures. Outside, the museum's red carpet had been rolled up, the cameras had gone dark, and Manhattan's elite had gone back to their silk sheets, completely unaware of who had actually saved the night. But there, at the counter of a simple coffee shop, the triumph was quiet and permanent. The world celebrates the shine of jewels and the transparency of glass, but ignores the hands that held the weight in the shadows. As the sun rose over 3rd Avenue, Vance and Tess discovered that the most complex engineering isn't in a 200-year-old gown. It's the kind that joins two hearts through grease, honesty, and coffee, strong enough to wake up a soul. The most beautiful things are built in the shadows. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the mansion, drawing light across Vera's quiet room. In her hands, a small Polaroid photo, still fresh. In it, there was no luxury, no red carpet, no power. Just two exhausted bodies, sitting on a concrete floor covered in grease, laughing like they just discovered something money could never buy. Vera looked at her son's face, and for the first time in years, he didn't look perfect. He looked real. With a calm, quiet gesture, she placed the photo at the center of the table, replacing, without hesitation, the old, flawless corporate portrait. Because in that moment, she understood. The empire may have been built by Vance, but the man was finally born right there. Vera closed her eyes, at peace, like someone who knows the foundation is now strong enough to hold up any future. Good work, James. You captured the exact moment he found his own soul. The world applauds the shine, but it's the dirty hands that hold everything up. And that's exactly what Vance discovered that night. That value isn't in what you show the world, but in what you hold up when nobody's watching. That control may build empires, but it's chaos that builds real people. And that sometimes you have to come all the way down to the floor, drop the pose, get your hands dirty, to finally find out who you really are. Maybe you've had a moment like that, when everything slipped out of control, when nothing made sense. But what if it wasn't the end? What if it was just life trying to take you to the right place in the only way you'd ever actually listen? Now tell me down in the comments. What was the moment in your life that took away your control, but ended up changing you completely? The end.